Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Atonal Symphonies, a conversation on blackness and liquidity at the threshold of thinking and making, presented by Blackness, Journal of Aesthetics and Black Studies. My name is Alessandra Raengo. I'm professor of moving image studies at Georgia State University. I am the founding co-editor-in-chief of the Blackness Journal and the research group that originated it in 2014. And I'm here with Lauren Cramer, who is the co-editor-in-chief, and I'm going to let her continue the introduction before we move into the panel.
Hi, I'm Lauren McLeod Cramer. I am jumping into this evening's panel, to begin us with two important acknowledgements. So first, the Liquid Blackness Research Group is located in Atlanta, Georgia, but from my home in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. My second acknowledgement is to our generous sponsors that made this event over the last 2 days possible. Thank you to the Department of Film and Media Studies at Emory University. Atonal Symphonies is also supported by the Cinema Studies Institute and the Black Research Network at the University of Toronto. Both during this process of planning have been in solidarity with the Canadian Association of University Teachers Censure, and hope that although this event looks like it's moving towards resolution, that you will learn more about it and the significance of academic freedom at censureuoft.ca. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. We're very grateful to our participants who are contributors to issue 5.1 on liquidity and 5.2 on blackness, and specifically the way blackness understands its own processes. And this work and your work is helping us launch the journal as a space that we hope will be oriented towards certain values. I've said it at every panel, and I think it's very important. The blurring of theory and practice, scholarly and creative work, institutional and non-institutional voices across seniority and generations, and our aspirational praxis of Black study, and therefore our commitment towards informality and improvisation. And it seems just perfect that we are concluding here with these artists and thinkers, Fred Moten, so that don't require any introduction. Fred Moten, Suné Woods, a visual artist, James Gordon Williams, scholar and a composer and pianist, Walton Muyumba as well, scholar primarily from the University of Indiana, and my co-facilitator is Chip Linscott. You can wave, who is at Ohio University. So it seems really perfect, right, to kind of think about our values again, because your practice, so I'm going to call it practice, whether it takes place in writing, whether it takes place in composing, whether it takes place in the practice of being together, the way James, Suné, and Fred have done with You Are Mine, I See Now, I'ma Have to Let You Go. That was the piece that was presented in several places, but the one specifically that we focused on was the presentation at the Hammer Museum Made in LA 2018. And they had a live performance that I confess initially, because of, Eric Cristobal, the curator of this performance, did not give much of an introduction. And I think that offered a really interesting provocation for people that saw it like me on YouTube, so retrospectively. And so we do wanna talk about that first, and the way in which informality, improvisation, and incompleteness seem to be really at the roots of it. And one of the main, rubrics that I am thinking it through, and Chip is going to jump in and elaborate on that, is something that Fred said during the Q&A when he was asked about the question of context. What does it mean to see Black art in context? And Fred said, this is a church problem. And the problem of how stuff goes together in a world that is continuing to keep, try to keep stuff separated in the interest of accumulating certain things and disposing of other things. This is an ecological problem, but it's a church problem. And so I would love to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit more about how you work out this problem in your own practice, in these performances. They are serial to some extent, and I'm sure you're looking forward to doing it again sometime soon. And Chip, feel free to jump in if you want to. So this practice of improvisation as practicing things going together, which, just so that I plant this already, I do think that is also a way in which Walton's essay is attempting to do it by drawing on several artists and the way in which he develops this idea of the collaged self, a collage being a much larger feature, right, of Black expressive culture, or at least that it functions as one of the many guiding metaphors. So if you could start, maybe James, you want to start talking about the way you are. I almost hesitate to call them roles, but the way in which you are working all together through this piece, especially for people who haven't seen it.
First of all, I'm very happy and honored to be here and to be with you all, and especially to see Fred and Suné again. It's been a while, since I've seen them in person, but I'm very happy to see you guys again. There was a recent conversation in a Jazz Studies Collective group on Facebook, and there was this whole argument about ownership, right? It's like, okay, we've been having this same argument about who owns Black music for generations, right? And it struck me that what Suné and Fred and I were doing was beyond that conversation. The way that we brought our meetings together was not about ownership, but about really going to a different place and performing something, I guess you would call it interdisciplinary. But there was really no concern for what you would consider tensions between our various mediums, which made it so exciting. Now, I was listening to Thomas de France just yesterday evening, and the way he was talking about his work as sort of a temporary, kind of a moving through, and the way that it sort of addresses Blackness. And I was also thinking about Sampada's comments about David Hammond's in regards to the idea of not owning anything, right? And it being about mystery. And I think that's, I don't want to speak for Suné or Fred, but I think that's what we were doing. It was not about solidifying what we're doing. It's about letting go and getting into this space where we were talking together and improvising all together. And what's exciting to me is and what I've been working, what I've been moving to more recently is sort of leave this sort of model of, I wanted to divorce myself of the sort of model of the jazz musician, getting out of that. That's hooked up to capitalism, that's hooked up to ownership, that's hooked up to commodification, right? And I want to be in conversation with different artists, right? And we get to this, working with Suné and Fred has helped me get to this place that has been very exciting, and it's taught me things about improvisation that I would not have necessarily learned had we all been musicians in the traditional sense.
I love that. Suné, please.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me here. And it is surreal and wonderful to see you, Fred and James, and hello everyone who's here and whose still photo is kind of in the box. So, yeah, I guess I was also kind of thinking about what is the difference between improvisation and freestyling, like, or you know, possibly as a generational term. But you know what it felt like we were in the midst of, because like every time we came together, it was a different iteration, which was really exciting, you know, and that it was, you know, we were, especially in the iteration at the Hammer, we were able to kind of both all fully contribute, you know, in previous iterations, it was a pre-edited visual, you know, so it was live editing in the Hammer iteration. So we were able to really come together in a way that was really exciting, as James said, that kind of like dispel a lot, you know, and just it felt more like a laboratory, you know, in the space, and being able to just jam, you know, and yeah, so but yeah, I guess like when the term improv, or, you know, like this kind of like practiced, I guess, what is the practicing that we're doing, or what is in practice, or what is the practice that we created, you know, or did we create a practice, you know? So those are the kinds of things that I'm kind of mulling over and thinking about right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I meant like practice as processual, right? And always incomplete. That's how it seemed to, that's what it seemed like you guys were working out. Mm-hmm. Fred?
Although I get, and yeah, let me echo the thanks. It's really great to be here in, you know, under the auspices of Liquid Blackness, and also just so much appreciate y'all giving us a chance to be together again. We I guess in my mind, I always lament the fact that we don't get to practice. You know, that we've always said that, man, if we could just have, I don't know, a couple of weeks together, you know, in somebody's garage or in somebody's barn or something, it's no telling what we could do, you know, not in the sense of working it all out, but in the sense of just giving ourselves more experience of working together, particularly with regard to, you know, I agree with James that there wasn't any tension between us in the sense of the fact that we were working in these different media and different genres, but maybe James, you did have a little bit of a head start on us in terms of what it meant to work with other people in the moment, you know, and obviously I think that Suné had a head start on me in terms of what it meant to work with other people. You know, it's the sort of infernal isolation and, you know, sort of solitariness of writing that, you know, that I had to get past. And of course, the way you get past it is by realizing that it was fake all the time anyway, right? You're not trying to get past a real thing. You're trying to get past an illusion, which is even tougher, you know, because nobody writes anything by themselves ever, you know, but you can bullshit yourself into thinking that you do, you know, and the profession is certainly constantly trying to make you think that you do because of the ways in which you get valued and evaluated and so forth. So working with other folks helps you. It's like the practice of working with other people helps you get past the illusion of this sense that you are ever by yourself. And right now, all all I wish for is that we have a chance to do more, that we get a, you know, we just need some space, you know, and some time to work together and do more stuff. And, you know, I'm tending to go on too long already, but I will say this one thing. Part of what I think made it so great was that, you know, we had maybe in various, like I had known James, you know, a long time, you know, we corresponded together, you know, when you were at graduate school, you know, or just finishing graduate school about your work. And then, and even a deeper way, I got to know Suné because our kids were friends, you know, and our kids would go over to each other's houses and play. And in a lot of ways, what we were doing was a kind of, you know, it was their lead. It was the kids' leads that we were following in terms of just figuring out what it was like to play together, to get to know each other, and to improvise at the level of play in that way. So.
You know, I was thinking of something that came up yesterday. Speaking of children, my youngest fractured the tip of his finger. It's been a very busy day. But the idea of cool as a refusal, that might have been to France. And the way that we play together as the idea of coolness and as a refusal, right? Which I think connects to your idea of not consenting to be a single being. I just think it's, you know, the idea of refusal of ownership, I think we exemplified that in the moment. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, from the outside, oh, sorry, Suné, you were going to say something.
No, go ahead.
Well, from the outside, right? So I just imagine one of the burning questions could be, what came first, right? What was the prompt? Was it Suné's visual? Was it my... But then the moment I asked that question, I realized that that's not the point. That in fact, what you were able to make happen is also, you know, again, going back to this question of ownership, the delusions of ownership, right? Including self-possession, is that we're witnessing something where that question becomes, it just makes it irrelevant. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, something came first, I guess, but it wasn't first. You know, it was just, there was something came first so that you could then see what came before that, right? Like, but I can't remember. Did we do the thing that we did in Syracuse? That was before the Hammer or after the Hammer?
That was before the Hammer.
Yeah. So,
yeah, and prior to that, it was us collaborating for the City of Writers. Yeah.
So, well, I guess the thing I would want to, okay, so somebody's going to have to step up, you know, and really, it's going to have to be these moderators, you know, Alessandra and Lauren, to keep me from talking too much, because I can't seem to stop. But I remember we you know, even when we were working, like Suné would come over and we had this kind of little office in the backyard where we would work, and we were just using this in a way, the extent the collaboration with Suné that we sort of started with was an extension of a collaboration with Wu Sang. And the reason why I say that is because we had that recording machine where we would do stuff with, which I would have never had if it wasn't for working with Wu. you know, where we had like a little loop machine so we could make these little sound loops and stuff. And we were trying to make sound loops, but the sound loops were in response to images from video that Suné was making. And then it was maybe like a serendipitous thing that you got that thing at Syracuse, and so, which allowed me to come visit, but that's where James teaches, you know. But then we had already sort of known each other before that too. So some of it has to do with just luck, you know, and then it has to do with making the most out of the luck of being able to connect up with certain people at a certain moment, you know, like kind of just being open to being with who you're with, you know, and also being open to the fact that to being open to seeing how what they're doing is really cool, you know. It's like, which is to say, I suppose that we didn't step to each other with a critical attitude. And we didn't step to each other with, you know, maybe the attitude that critique would be the way in which we would advance the common project. It wasn't critique that was going to advance the common project. It was more like acceptance and maybe even a certain amount of wonder. Like, oh, that's cool, right? Like, maybe that's the cool part, you know, that you saw something cool in what somebody else did, and you're just happy to know that they were open to you doing something in response or with it, you know. So there was an ethics to it, you know. Now I always associated that ethics with the practice of making jazz, but James, it sounds like you're saying maybe I had been romantic in that presumption. So, you know, so.
Well, it's interesting. You know, that's a good question. When I first, as was said, I came in, I was, you know, the last person to join this trio. And I remember the initial feelings of working with you guys, and
what were they?
Oh, I lost the connection for a moment. I'm not sure.
Everybody thought you were thinking, but you were something else. Everybody thought it was like this reflective moment, but
yeah. Let me get the connection back. Okay. God, it was so much fun and it was beautiful. But it was also like, you know, stepping out into the abyss. I remember Cornel West's conversation with the trumpeter, Terrence Blanchard. They're having these conversations in between compositions. And Cornel West said the great ones step out into the abyss and feel like they just know they're going to land on something, right? And for me, it felt like that when I was working with Suné and Fred, that I was just stepping out into the abyss, but I was rewarded by hearing things and seeing things that I'd never experienced before. So it wasn't exactly comfortable, right? And so, but that's what excites me. This is the liquidity that excites me, you know, pushing me into these new directions. I just think, Fred, that, you know, so many people have talked about jazz as a particular thing, and it's a kind of a, you know, generations of people are trying to discipline what they call, this music jazz, and of course, you know, AACM calls creative improvised music. And so many people have tried to get around this idea. I just want to leave that discourse altogether and become something else. And I felt that I was that something else with you both. Okay. And to just rip the machinery out of that model altogether and just, you know, improvise in permutations in ways that, and I think that, you know, Blackness has always been transmedia. You know, it's always been, you know, we come up with these fancy terms for it, but it's always been that way. And so I think we're just sort of articulating the vast potentiality of what was always there. This is just our peculiar iteration of it. But what we're doing does not fit within the traditional model of so-called jazz improvisation, which is why I was so happy to, and I'm so happy to continue leaving that. You know, I often talk about the compositional structures of tunes, and so many people have talked about this, from Edward Bland in the Cry of Jazz, and the way he talked about, you know, the compositional form representing segregation, and the melodic improvisation represented the breaking free from that. So it's always been there. You know, the idea that I think even back there in 1958, 1959, they're saying that this type of commodified improvisation is dead, but the spirit of jazz is alive. So we don't have to call it jazz. We call it whatever we're doing is very much alive, very much real, very much not commodified, very much free. And so that's what I'm about, you know, moving in that direction. But I understand what you mean.
I wonder if Walton wants to also, and that was incredibly helpful, James, thank you. Also, you know, because in a sense you are, I mean, I don't know if this is blasphemy, but you're almost improvising with yourself. And I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about your piece is the discipline that it takes to, you know, that it takes to kind of bring together all of these pieces, but without demanding completion, without demanding resolution, without demanding. So can you talk about that, and also the process of writing it, you know, which obviously must have taken bits and pieces, your own personal archive in many ways.
Is Walton still here?
I'm here.
Okay.
I didn't realize that was coming to me. I thought that was to the field. Yeah, so to kind of pick up on what James was just talking about in terms of getting free. In many ways, the piece is the beginning of an already ongoing process, right? So the piece kind of is coming out of an ongoing process of kind of releasing myself from certain inhibiting narratives or structures, whether they're visible or invisible. And the way out, I think, is through play and improvisation. And on some level, the piece is one outcropping from all of that play and layering and connection. Way behind it, and this goes back also to something that James mentioned, and that actually, in a way, kind of, I'm thinking about something that Fred said all those months ago back in Knoxville. It may have been a throwaway comment as we were sitting around in the hotel between or following sessions, and just thinking about how to unencumber ourselves from institutional narratives. So I guess that's a long way of saying that one of the things when you're connected with the academy is that you're being corralled by narratives of meritocracy. And one of the things I wanted to get out from underneath was writing as a manner of proving my value to the institution. And this piece that isn't is coming out of the midst of an ongoing practice that I actually couldn't name without writing the piece is part of that effort. One of the things I heard growing up in my parents' home was talk about home all the time. Oh, this stuff is going on back home, and back home is Congo Kinshasa, is the Kasai region, is Mbuji-Mayi, and I've been trying to figure out how to negotiate my access to multiple homes, the home that I grew up in, this nation state that I was born into, but also this elsewhere that I'm connected to. Like, how do I chart a route back to that? And so I'm using the tools that are available to me to start taking those kinds of steps. And maybe as I've said already, that's ongoing, and I didn't know how to like articulate that to myself until I had to like figure out how to make this piece. I'll pause there and see if that inspires a question.
Well, I actually have a question, Walton, that's based on something you wrote, and I think it's starting to be collectively answered, but Alessandra already gestured toward the Hammer Q&A where Fred said that Blackness is the ethical comportment that makes stuff go together. And in your piece, which is just wonderful, you wrote that maybe the process of attuning these different selves, like the critical self and the artistic self, is possibly the chemistry of improvisation and the wellspring of freedom. And I think you were already just talking about that, but I think my larger question is, this piece is like you working through making stuff go together over a period of years, right? You're like, how do I get all this stuff to go together? And Fred's saying like that Blackness has to keep working against other forces that want to tear stuff apart, right? That want it to all be separate. And so I guess my larger question then is like, how, for everybody, is how do you make stuff go together that people or even our own critical selves will initially see as separated or want to keep separating, And I think you started talking about that just now, but like, how do we make stuff go together?
So I guess on some level, I had to start doing that the minute I left my parents' care and started attending public school, because I had to manage, I was coming out of a multilingual familial circumstance, right? Where French and Chuluba and English were being used interchangeably as a way of identifying things within the house, and going to a monolingual system, even with my kind of immature 5-year-old's brain, I had to regulate myself. And I think that's the beginning of the process of that tearing apart. But it took, and I'm gonna cite my partner here, Marissa Moorman, who told me a few years ago when I was lamenting that I hadn't moved about the world the way I wanted to. She reminded me that as the firstborn child of Congolese immigrants to the United States, I had to learn how to be American. I had to learn how to be Black American. And so I probably had to narrow my possibilities in terms of kind of cultural practice until I got to a place where I could be, more open and accepting of that multiplicity, and then figure out how to put that multiplicity to work. So I don't think that there's a moment where you just start to know. It's probably that, at least for me, psychologically, emotionally, or even in a kind of auditorial or even gastronomic circumstance, I was always putting things together and putting them in conversation. But that was something I had to hold to myself, because it didn't seem that there was the spaces I had to move through were going to recognize the kind of collaging that I was doing. And then I got to a place where I could actually embody that, speak it, write it, describe it, maybe even teach it. And so I start to see these, maybe access points to another kind of being and living, that kind of getting free that James was just mentioning.
Thank you so much for that. If anybody wants to, I think this is a productive, right, line of thinking. Also, because maybe I can bring it, unless someone wants to jump in. Fred, you were nodding, so I don't want to put you on the spot.
I mean, no, everything. Well, for me, what's so deep and rich in what Walton was just saying, it kind of picks up on something that was being discussed in the previous panel, and that, Ronaldo Walcott was talking about in this sort of sense of which he was almost making almost a certain kind of argument that I subscribe to myself as well, in his, wake of a kind of preferential option for diaspora. Okay. That it becomes something that at a certain point you have to choose, which is complicated insofar as for most of us in this hemisphere at least, diaspora was not a matter of choice, right? So the question is, how do you come to choose it? And one way to think about that is that, it becomes something that the possibility of choosing diaspora, the possibility of preferring diaspora, is in some ways something that is renewed, by the experience of African immigrants specifically, in the Western Hemisphere, and maybe even more specifically, African immigrants and Caribbean immigrants to the United States and to Canada, and then to Britain, who chose a displacement. They had to, or at least under a certain set of constraints, they chose that displacement, and it echoes, the chosen displacements that allow us to think about diaspora as primarily an intra-African affair, which was something that, again, Walcott was saying, and Grant Fard was, I think, saying too, and all it makes me think of is makes me want to go back to the notion of practice, and which therefore makes me want to think about Brent Edwards and his great book, The Practice of Diaspora, which is, and it actually makes me want to go back and think about R.A., Judy from last night, who was, very, very brilliantly requiring us to consider the difference between the practice of human being and human being as a practice, or, or the practice of being human and the practice of human being. Those little fine lines of differentiation between those terms become something that we are required to pay attention to. But the point is that this if we think about our preference for diaspora as also a preference for a practice rather than for an identity, right? All of a sudden, a whole bunch of stuff is opened up for us, and at the same time, even maybe more importantly, something is foreclosed to us, but which is probably necessary that it should be foreclosed, and that's the illusion of home, right? Or the illusion of some sort of achieved autochthony, let's say, So that's why what James is saying is so exciting to me. I'm like, I'm ready to go too, man. Maybe for a long time I've been looking to jazz as if it were a potential home, and you're ready to go. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go with you. Let's go. And certainly the academy is nobody's home. And I don't know that insofar as Black Studies has been in a certain way enveloped by the academy, and maybe that envelopment was because in some weird ways that's where it started as a discipline rather than as a mode of practice, right? I'm ready to go. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Let's make something new. And in that respect, we can then begin to consider, this absolutely necessary interplay between abolition and exodus. You can't have one without the other, it seems like.
Thank you. I wanna try to ask a question that is, or see how Suné, like your personal practice, even before, right? This work that you did together, this practice that you did together. Obviously, every time we enter a medium, there is a history that comes with it. I'm trying to figure out what are the equivalent kind of strictures and forms of institutionalization that you're also pushing again or try. I mean, the one really remarkable, I keep coming back to it, metaphor. And again, and I do want to say what was said earlier, we use metaphors, we try not to fetishize them, right? There's something wrong about them. But the search for air pockets that happens through that piece, and it happens at all levels, across media. I wonder, right, if that's another way of thinking about, Thomas de France calls the watery folds, right? There are these moments, these places that might offer alternatives, a way to, to exit, in fact, a way to go, but they remain exceptionally vulnerable, right? The risk of implosion, the risk of failure, the risk of not making it is always there. And that's something that your mind really brings forward. And Walton's piece, obviously, is also just very, very vulnerable. And I wonder how you think about it in your own practice, with or without them, right? Like, I don't know if you want to think separately. I mean, it's difficult in this conversation to now separate oneself, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. You mean the like literal air pockets? Is that what you're?
Well, yeah, I think about the visual work that you do, mm-hmm. right? In this practice, you were not just doing visual mixing, not that wouldn't be enough, right? But you carried some of the spoken word or whatever. But I'm thinking the way I was looking at the way movements, were expressed, this constant coiling, this constant reverb, and I was wondering if there is an attempt to create some kind of formal equivalent. Maybe that's not might be the right way to say it, for what the air pockets that the piece is also about.
I mean, I think what comes up for me is, like when in the conversation around illusion, around play, around abolition is, and what I guess like what my work I feel is driving towards is this and I guess like, you know, when I hear Fred talk about like a choice of diaspora and, you know, whether it's forced or chosen and all of that spiritual, energetic, you know, all of this kind of like residue that we hold in our bodies and our genes and our cells. And, you know, we had a lot of conversations in the group talking about whales, you know, our relationship to whales, or just even our relationship to aquatic animals, mammals, species. And so I guess like what I tend to move towards is like, what are the shifts that have to happen energetically, spiritually, existentially, metaphysically. Like that's kind of the spaces in which I feel like it's necessary to breathe. So I think that perhaps like the way in which I want the work to push, or I want the work to is that it's not ascribing to whatever this conception of like a Western notion of making is, you know, and it's utilizing knowledges that aren't necessarily, you know, applauded by an academy.
Feel free to jump in. I mean, I really want to have this as free flowing as possible. I mean, we're obviously getting at a cluster of concepts and they're all related. So if anything appeals to you, just go for it.
It's a very rich conversation, and I suppose, you know, it could come in at very different angles. I think it was George Lewis. We're also talking about improvisation. So George E. Lewis, the great composer, improviser, cultural theorist, he defined improvisation as dealing with a set of conditions and not a choice, and about sort of being comfortable with indeterminacy, right? So in our particular case, we're dealing with a set of conditions, and now I would say on the times, you know, when we performed, at least I was personally denied a feeling of completion in that sense. And that's fine. I can live with that. You know, better to think of it as an ongoing conversation than anything with finality. You know, we are inculcated in so many different ways to understand what is finality. Of course, within the musical sense, you know, you're trained to think, okay, well, you play these couple chords and this represents finality. You know, you go to the dominant seventh chord to the tonic, boom, you're home, right? Everything has a beginning, middle, and an end. But does it? And you know, in Western European art music, they have this term called the deceptive cadence. So instead of going to that so-called home chord or the tonic chord, you might go to the sixth chord or an A minor chord. But I think, and I've always felt for the longest time, and I really believe and I practice that whatever kind of structures, and I think this really applies to our work, whatever, there are so many structures there and moves that come out of the repertory of commodified music. And I imagine for film and another, but when I was young and I would be composing something on the piano, my mother would sometimes say, it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like it's finished. But for me, it was. And I always felt like, in an improvisation, it's not about any finality on any given performance. It's only an invitation to go on and do the next one. And you hear the dust settling, but it's not really settled, but it's a kind of thing that, and sometimes I hear musicians do it in the way that they will finish a piece. It is a decision to come together, unspoken, a kind of feeling that happens. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes, most of the times, if you're lucky, you're right. But it's about listening. And I had to listen in a different way. I had to listen to with my eyes, to what Suné was doing, and I had to listen to what Fred was doing. And it's not about a perfect ending or a perfect resolution. It's not about resolution at all. It's about kind of a letting go and ending up in a different place where you began, and always ending up in a different place where you began. So, and I think you hear this. There's so many examples of this in music, but I think what we're doing is an extension of that, individually and collectively. That is the exciting part, but there's no sense of reward in the traditional sense, and I don't ever want to feel rewarded. No, let's see what happens next, and next, and next, and next, right? Almost like a sus chord going infinitely, vamping on one of those sus chords, and then what is resolution? So anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm jumping in again. Sorry, but I'm jumping in, and I'm jumping towards you, Walton. I think, man, because I think you're the one who could. Okay, so basically, like James, man, choice was not a good word. That was an imprecise term for what I was trying to talk about, and you're so right to point that out, right? Like, it's like the thing about like consent not to be a single being is consent not to be a single being cannot be the act of a single being, right? It cannot be the act or the decision of a single being, okay? Which means that consent in that phrase, which is Glissant's phrase, but which is also submitted to the random effect of translation, right? By Christopher Winks, when he renders it into English so that it becomes something even just a little bit different than what it was when Glissant says, right? That's not a matter of an individual intention or act. It's not an individual. It's not an individual decision. It doesn't operate in any kind of normative way within the framework of the Western philosophy of action, as well as the history of a certain kind of Western discourse on ethics. And this is why I'm pointing this in your direction, Walton, because you study pragmatism and you know what it is that I don't know about this, right? But it's like, so what would be a better word than choice? And the better word that I said in the first place, probably, but then I backed away from it, was preference. And the reason why I said prefer, although it's not a perfect word, but it's what it is it's a liberation theology word. Okay. And I didn't want to say preferred diaspora within the context of a liberation theological discourse, because I didn't want to burden Professor Walcott with a theological discourse that I'm pretty sure he doesn't really care about that much, right? And I didn't want to muddy that water for him. But the preference for diaspora would be something like what liberation theologians would call a preferential option for the poor. But the other way to think about it is that this preference is another way to think about it is it's an inclination, a preference for, or an inclination towards, or even a kind of favoring, like the way old Black folks used to say, you favor your daddy, a favoring of indeterminacy. What it means to favor the indeterminate, right? To tend toward, to lean toward the indeterminate, to let that be your inclination, okay? But recognizing that even that inclination, that favoring, is something that's done in common. It's something that's done in concert. It's something that's done at the level of gathering, right? And it connects back to the question you were asking, Chip, because and then the question is, what's the practice? What practice makes this gathering possible? Like to say how stuff goes together is different than to say how things go together, because things implies the individual separation of thing by thing. Stuff is a mass word as opposed to thing, which is a count word. And an even better word for stuff is shit. Like how shit go together, right? And it's a word that is not determined by the simple opposition of singular and plural, or by their addition, right? It's outside of that metaphysical constraint and construct. So how shit go together, and it turns out maybe the way shit go together is by way of differentiation. Shit go together by differing, right? The gathering is a practice of differing, right? Which is again something that that Walcott was saying today, I think, in some ways. It ain't got to be arguing all the time. It ain't got to be fighting, although it could be, it can be that way. But it could be, but then the question is, what's this interplay, so to speak, between differing and preferring, between differing and favoring, right? Like, how do we engage that practice? How do we practice that practice? Like so that we can get better at it, kind of thing. Okay. That's it for me for the rest of the damn day.
I think part of what you're getting at, and I think what's powerful is that you part of figuring out what shit goes with what is about collaboration. I suppose what the pragmatist might say is, like, we're trying to form discourse communities where we're sorting out what are the useful terms, what are we going to name things, including the practice. And so, there's a will to believe, right? And there's also a will to truth, if you will, right? And William James would talk about the cash value of things, not in a capitalist sense, but the sense that the concept we come up with and that we name is going to have grand utility. And that many of us are going to be able to come to that term and find sustenance. And maybe that term becomes not as useful as more and more people come into the practice or splinter off into different kinds of discourse communities. And then among those communities, we're trying to come up with terms and concepts, right? So I think this is what was going on in the previous panel and talking about diaspora, not as a singular thing, but in its multiplicities, right? This is to bring, let me bring up a couple texts, because this always is helpful, at least for my own thinking here. One text being Ross Gay's powerful poem, Beholding, where he cites Allen Iverson. We're talking about practice. And he tries to find in the repetition this place where practice becomes so capacious that the concept of practice becomes the thing that we're trying to get to itself, right? And once we get there, it is in fact a way of beholding each other, right? And I think that's extremely powerful. The other text I want to bring up is actually is a new thing, but it's also part of a continuum, and it is Gail Jones's new novel, Palmares. Palmares is actually not a new novel. It is a novel that refers back to other parts of Jones's oeuvre. And in that way, what she's trying to get us to think about is what John Weidman would call great time, borrowing from John Beatty. So great time is this sense of simultaneity, that even though the novel Palmares is supposed to be set in 1680, it's actually about 2021. And that it's not simply about these Africans who were taken to Brazil, who are then trying to found various quilombo to escape and then recreate society. It's that the quilombo is being recreated all the time.
Yes.
Right? And so when you think about her late 90s novels, this is Gail Jones, The Healing or Mosquito, and you put it next to Palmares, you see that there is a continuum, that the characters in 1680 are thinking, imagining this futurity, while those characters from those earlier novels are trying to figure out how to access something like the past.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very that's black shit right there. That's black shit. Right. And I think that's what you're trying to get to. Like I think that great sense of great time, that simultaneity, but also the practice of literally dwelling in that simultaneity and trying to figure out how to, if not get home, make homes, make places, right?
Making generations in the impossibility of motherhood, right? So it goes back to Corregidor too. And this means that Palmares is an improvisation right? Where improvisation is also criticism, it's revision.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like Palmares is a new novel in the same way that Miles playing So What in 1968 is a new song. Right? It's that, it's a matter of like this extended sort of autocritical repertoire thing, right? Right? I mean, no, man, that's yeah.
I want to jump in to say, because that Erin Christoval described Suné's use of constant recombination, and I forget what is the exact term that she used, and of course, so I invite you to jump in. The constant remixing in your work in very similar terms. I don't recall that this part of the conversation actually made it into the journal page, which is I mean, it's part of it did. But even in previous conversations with her, and that was one of the things that attracted her to your work so much. So do you want to, I don't know if this resonates with you in terms of like also define a certain concept of temporality that is part of this constant remixing. She says, Suné's work exists in a million places, right? I mean, it's like, where is it? Where is it? It's in so many places at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly that particular comment.
Oh, sorry, she made it with me on the phone, not during the Q&A.
Oh,
okay, that's why. Yeah, no.
Oh, I thought that was in the Q&A. Yeah, I mean, it resonates with me in what was spoken about creating home or making home, or and what was brought up was all shit goes together, or shit goes together, like what it means when shit goes together, or like what it means when the three of us, all our shit goes together. But no, I think that what I'm interested in, and kind of, I guess, like the word you use, remixing, I would say is like, it's trying to get at something that's not seen, trying to get at something that's intangible, like it really is important for me to, and I think that all of these things, like the histories, that I bring together it's important for me to understand just I guess like what I'm trying to say is, like, when I'm interested in kind of the language of what these things are doing, and so it's a visual language, obviously, but there's also these other kinds of languages, gestural, what I'm really interested in is spiritual language, so how do we communicate in those ways, So I think that's what I'm interested in, and I think that, like, what maybe is exciting about what the three of us, the play that we're doing, because it's like, all of these languages coming together and kind of like figuring out how to communicate, or what is the communication, or what is the new, maybe not even new, but what is kind of like the shift in the way that we're conversating, or having a conversation. So it's like a conversation, like all these things that have multiple languages that I'm interested in, and how that is possibly shifting energies, in terms of, like, what I'm interested in is us all healing, like healing from all of this, like, really weighted shit, that we're carrying.
Can I jump in and ask a question, actually, of Suné? I'm wondering if you feel like I'm also thinking something that James was saying earlier about composition, and I wonder if you are taking, if there's something in your practice that you're trying to solve or resolve isn't the right language, but part of what I'm asking is something like this. Are you taking the same photograph over again? Are you trying to figure out a particular problem? And is that built into something iterative in what you're doing? Just thinking about improvisation and play, repetition. Is there something that you feel in terms of the visual language that you're trying to figure out?
I mean, I think I use the visual language to try to figure out these other things. Like when Fred and I first came together to collaborate, we were both thinking separately about notions of intimacy. And so these different ways in which that can be articulated is like what comes through the visual language. So maybe it repeats, maybe like you get your heart broken many times, but it's different each time, or you love many times, it's different every time. So in some ways, yes, like there's a repetition, but it's not in the way that like the data is exactly the same.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
But the intimacy, the extent to which I was trying to write something with intimacy on my mind was strictly as a way of like documenting my own, response to Suné's moving images, right? Emphasis on moving, and feeling, and saying, okay, well, this was trying to, it was like taking notes on something, on somebody trying to teach me about intimacy through images, and through images of movement. And I was just thinking, y'all, when we get together the next time, and I'm going to try to figure out some kind of way for us to do it, like this summer, some kind of way. I mean, I think I got some place where we can go. Should we work with a dancer?
I think this is practice, so you can go ahead and say out loud what you guys want to do next. So
We are all dancers.
I'm totally open. Totally. Yeah.
I have a friend named Nia Love, and she's been doing all this dance stuff, and she's doing it like underwater. And a lot of the dance stuff she's doing was reminding me of some of the scenes that you shot, Suné. And I shouldn't be so coy. I wasn't just thinking about a dancer, I was thinking about one in particular.
Okay.
named Nia Love, who anyway, so.
So are you somehow also saying that when shit goes together, it attracts more shit? Like, I just feel like that there is a way which when the gut, right, that there is a, I don't know.
That's interesting.
You know what I'm saying, right? Yeah.
Constellations, yeah. Go ahead, Fred.
It attracts more shit, as in bullshit too, though, right? Like, as in bullets, right? I mean, which is the beauty of that, Black vernacular moment, is that it encompasses all that, like the way the vast range of Black Englishes does a whole lot of shit with the word shit. And some of it is good. Some of it is the shit, and some of it is some bullshit, and so it does attract more, but everything that it attracts ain't good,
Kind of reminds me of that old adage that African-American improvisers have been throwing around for a long time. When in doubt, lay out. It's like it's a bullshit monitor. Like anything, if you're that's something I was thinking about as I was performing with you, Suné and Fred. I refuse to force myself to do something, even if I felt uncomfortable at the time. And sometimes people, when they feel uncomfortable, they feel like they have to force themselves into a situation. Yeah, I've done it too, and we've seen it happen, whether it's that uncomfortable silence in the classroom. I think that's where the good stuff is, that sort of uncomfortable silence, and something erupting out of that. Let the spirit lead you. When in doubt, lay out. And that applies to a whole set of different situations. But, I think in terms of the process of creating in real time, that's very helpful to me. When you're going into the unknown, you have to really fight against old patterns and go away from them. I think that's the practice.
I mean, it's very powerful to hear that, like some of the germs began around the question of intimacy, right? Because it is also an incredibly vulnerable space. It's also a space, right, that you were talking about being on the edge of the abyss, right? It requires this constant, again, preference for pushing and letting incomplete. I think, Fred, you answered that question in the chat, right? Chat about incomplete. Yes, thank you. But if you want to elaborate, that's wonderful. And, this is the last panel. So at the risk of being a little bit selfish, this is the last panel. And I just want to ask, thinking about your work, thinking about your practice is very inspiring for us to think about what are the points of tension that one needs to sit with, for example, right? What are the chances that one has to be willing to make, and what it takes to keep shit to, let's say the good, but I don't want to judge, but to keep shit together long enough, or in order for the practice to continue, to go to the next step and the next. And, for us, it's, your work across so many different spaces. But we have created a journal. I mean, it's one of the manifestations. I guess the journal is just one of the faces, the concrete manifestations that this takes. But we constantly think, we try to stay, I guess I don't even know what I'm trying to ask, but there is this incredible tension between a certain completeness that goes into a published essay. That's why we welcome work that is not complete, or work that is constantly thinking about it. That maybe it's a space where people can experiment with things that are not normally allowed in academia. But then again, right, it's very difficult to manage that relationship. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because part of activating what happened on the page was also so that we could have this conversation.
I suppose one of the things that I have been thinking about in terms of practice, I always feel like I have these belated realizations, but it's only lately that I have realized the significance, the necessity of collaborators. They probably have been present for me in various ways. People I've just been in conversation with for so long that I haven't recognized it exactly as collaboration until I pause and see how certain interlocutors have been pushing me. But I think part of collaboration that is significant, and maybe the the piece that the other three accomplished and continue to, and I think accomplishing isn't necessarily completeness, but they pulled off one version and they're going to pull off subsequent versions, and they're adding shit to it so that there are these new possibilities emerging. All of that comes from trust. And so when I'm thinking about practice, what I need is collaborators that I trust enough to fail with. And failure doesn't mean we don't accomplish a thing or that the thing is ruinous. It may not actually meet the desires we had to begin with. So it becomes something else. And so we have to then think, okay, well, what can we do with this next version? Which is one of the things I have to think about with my own piece, is like, what's the next iteration? And I think in terms of like Blackness and Liquidity, I can't come close to the kind of mobility, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, that is necessary to continue to create without being engaged with others. And so part of my own practice is a reading practice where I'm reading pretty constantly so I can find more and more formal ideas to bring into play with my own. I also think that it's about a kind of inspiration that comes from watching others, right? That to think of Coltrane, or excuse me, of Miles Davis in 1968, he's always still improvising as though he's trying to, I think, force a kind of minimal practice against the kind of bigness or excess of Coltrane, even though he stopped playing with Coltrane a long time earlier. And so there isn't necessarily, again, a beginning or an ending. We're constantly playing through the things we have attempted before. And so there's, along with trust, there's a kind of discipline that enters the practice so that you don't try to resolve a particular progression towards home. And I'm thinking of a line that I just pulled up here from the piece that Suné and James and Fred put together, that Blackness is arpeggiation and displacement, right? And so there is always this kind of motion, this movement towards resolution, but also a movement away simultaneously. It's almost like your Blackness is simultaneously the thing that you name, and as soon as you name it, it's slipping the mark, so to speak, and becoming something else. And so keeping that in mind, I'm always trying to engage with the kinds of artists and artistry that is going to let me do that simultaneously. Right.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Now, one of the things that you exciting thing I think about our work together was that there was no possibility of mimicry. And they had to do with the different mediums. You know, sometimes you're on a bandstand and another musician will play the same rhythmic idea to prove that they're listening or to prove that they can accomplish it. And to me, that just weighs you down. And so I've always, whenever just a little smidgen of that, I've run in the opposite direction. Because the most exciting thing is the complementary cross rhythms. right? And it forces you to keep creating in the moment, to be, and that would be a true dialogue. But couldn't do that with Suné and Fred, no. And I welcome that wholeheartedly. But yeah, to your point, yeah, it is that slippage. It is the to use a term differently that Daphne Brooks uses in her book Liner Notes for the Revolution. She talks about sonic curation. I want to flip it differently and say, yeah, well, in the moment, you are doing a type of sonic curation of that slippage, making sure that you are complimenting and not just mimicking. Otherwise, it's just repetitive. It's like a grizzly bear jumping on your back. You wanted to get free. So always going in a direction of going away from those patterns. Wayne Shorter said something once, the saxophonist Wayne Shorter said something about when he thinks about a phrase, he doesn't think about it within sort of a 8-bar phrase. He thinks of it as one long beat, one long cycle. And perhaps that's his slippage. And whatever happens within that is exciting. But it's avoidance of avoidance of the kind of ownership of the musical ideas by being free and open to other ideas. And it's even more exciting working with a live poet and a video artist, experimental video artist, if that makes sense.
I love this. Thank you so much. I can assure you that if in the analogy, the phrase would be a journal issue, Lauren and I don't even, we don't even experience the okay, you hit send at some point or you want to, sleep for 2 days, but there is no completion whatsoever. Like we always feel that every single issue busts through the seams into the next one, and then this conversation has been so good because of they reactivate this reverb. Basically, don't trust me when I talk about sound because I don't have the language. So please, you fill the blank with the right word. Unless there are some concluding comments, I wanted to invite, and please, Fred, Suné, Walton, and yeah, thank you. I'm glad that Lauren came back.
I'll hop in that case. This has been such a phenomenal conversation. I'm so grateful. I'm surprised it took 4 panels to get to Allen Iverson, but I'm glad we did make it. So thank you, and, this comfort without being done, without being finalized, it's almost, it's so loud. Like we really, the way that it resonates is with the work that we're trying to do is sort of incredible. And I'm so grateful, as Alessandra just mentioned, for the way that this panel has helped us keep things undone, even though this is the last panel of the day, by continuing to return to our previous conversations from, all of our amazing contributors. It's the generosity of both writing this work, trusting us with it, coming here, but then also taking the time to listen to everyone else. Like that's really the kicker for me. And so I'm so incredibly grateful. Thank you.
Thanks for putting this together. This is, I couldn't think of a better way to spend my Thursday and Friday, honestly. I feel invigorated and actually really lucky to have my incomplete piece be presented through Liquid Blackness. It's a high watermark from me. So I really appreciate your editorial stewardship and bringing it and convening us for conversation. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Thank you guys. I'm honored to be here to listen and talk with you all.
I co-sign all of that. You know, I've found my people. How's that?
Yeah.
You guys are my people.
I was right before this panel, I was talking to Rod Judy, and telling him how depressed I was. But strangely, I feel very happy right now. So, and I'll be in touch with y'all soon so we can figure out, we can get together this summer and do something okay. And thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Chip and Jenny and Darren and Alessandra especially. And yeah, it's beautiful. And thank all the other panelists before us. It's been really nice 2 days. So I appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you so much for making the time. It really feels great, and thank you for spending 2 days with us. Hopefully, as I said in one of my initial emails, the way I would do it is to make lasagna and have you all over. That's the way it needs to happen. So
I would prefer that.
right. I mean, so well,
For sure.
Hey, it's in the future. So that's
One day.
Not done. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Matt, you can
Thank
stop
you.
streaming.